Hey guys, welcome to the CGM podcast. My name's Fehlis, or Chip. That's what my friends call me. And I'm one of the hosts here at CGM. I'm joined by Dr. Pastor, I have to say it every week, Michael Gossett. Mike, how are you?
Glad to be here. Yes. Another awesome episode.
Yeah.
Because we're continuing this series about this gospel-centered home.
Yeah.
It's really been fun to talk through some of these things. And you know what's interesting about it is the timing of this is really good because the culture, the world around us is really talking about gender, marriage, all of these things that we kind of hit last week on some of those details. But what are we talking about today?
Okay, so this week our episode's titled Fighting for Peace. We're talking and looking at the idea of conflict resolution in a gospel-centered home. And I mean, Mike, I can't speak for the Gossett household. I know that there has been, in my 5+ years of marriage now, there have been some conflicts in the Fehlis household. And having a proper way to respond to those conflicts is healthy, it's good, it's right. And I think this discussion will be really good. I don't think I'm going to say anything that's going to cause more conflict.
We will see after Lauren watches the episode. Lauren is Kurt's wife, and so this will be the test.
And she is the most gracious.
We will send this to her to see if she gives approval.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and you already referenced our previous episodes, and we were joined last week by Debbie Stewart, our women's minister. Did a great job. Loved her perspective. Again, if you haven't got a chance to dial in with that episode, please go back on YouTube and watch it. Go download the previous podcast episode and listen to it. Great discussion. But as we transition here into this week's episode, the reality. Conflict does happen in relationships, right? You see it even amongst friends. You see it in the workplace. But sadly, one of the most detrimental spots that conflict happens is at home with maybe the people that we love the most.
Well, I think the subject of conflict and resolution, how do you reach resolution in the midst of conflict, is one of those applicable subjects that no matter what season of life you are in, that this applies to you. Yeah. Because the type of conflict resolution that we will really kind of dial into today are tools that you could really use in all walks of life. I mean, this is going to be great for your marriage, but I would also say that it's great for the workplace. It's great for the way that you parent and the way that you disciple your kids and just the way that you respond to others in general. Because I think that the Lord has an incredible design of how you deal with disagreements. And so we don't have to pretend like conflicts don't exist. I think that would be easier. But you've already admitted to it. You've had some conflicts in your day.
I was thinking back as we were preparing for this.
Oh, no.
So young couples, right? You have that honeymoon phase where everything's great. And then at some point...
And you know everything. And you think, yeah. I love it.
No one can tell you anything different.
That's right.
But you come to that point at some point in your marriage, it may be the first week, right? I've heard of people whose honeymoon had conflict. But, it could be sometime later, but you run into your first big fight. And I was thinking back, okay, what was Lauren and I's first big fight? And this is going to be so comical.
Be careful here.
And I was in the wrong. But this is going to be so comical that this was the fight. And it's kind of appropriate. A few weeks ago, right, college football, NCAA passed the NIL, the ability for college athletes to begin getting money, right? To earn, on their name, image, and likeness.
Right.
Okay, a couple years ago, not long after we were married, it just came up about, and Lauren and I were talking on our way to church on a Sunday night. And it's like, hey, and I said something about, it'd be great if the University of Texas athletes could get money for all the money they bring to school. And Lauren, she went to the University of Texas and was like, well, I had to, pay my way to school. I had to do this and this. Why should they earn money? They're already getting free education. And Mike, I can't tell you, it just spun out, and we had the biggest argument, and it even spun off to what is actually classified even as a sport. It was the most bizarre thing to think back about, and I was in the wrong. I was being a stubborn man who said, "I know better on this topic than you." Man. And it's so comical to think that caused a friction, a fight between us.
So in 15 years, I'm sure you can name more.
Yeah.
Okay, because a lot of times in the middle of a conflict, when things, I love what you just said, it kind of spun out of control. When you get bent around the axle about something, you usually cannot remember exactly what you're fighting about or arguing about or what even the central disagreement is. Yeah. And I can tell you in 15 years, we've had a couple of those times
where you just see red and you're just mad and you're like, ah. And
it's so irrelevant to life and it doesn't do anything. So listen, we know that you have had similar stories, and listen, here is the bottom line. We talked about this in week 1. That, what was the title of that? It was
two wrongs
make a right. Well, the two wrongs are two individual sinners trying to come together as one. And, unity is so unique. And it can only be explained in the realm of the Spirit of God working and binding us together. And so when you think about unity in the marriage, because we are both broken sinners and we are both in need of a Savior, we're both in need of restoration, we're both in need of redemption, those things clash at times. Because the root of conflict is always a veiled perspective, right? And you can describe it as a misunderstanding or whatever you want to say. But I think the Lord gives us some good concepts of how we should respond to one another in the midst of difficulty, in the midst of conflict. And like I said before, don't think that this is just for married people, okay? We're applying it heavily in the marriage relationship, but this has to do with everyone and how you respond to others, all right?
Yeah, I mean, well, because the conflicts, even in the context of saying a gospel-centered home, right, it could be between a spouse, but it could be parent to kid, could be siblings, even as grown adults, right? There's conflicts between brothers, sisters, and so on, maybe from previous wrongdoings or conflict that was unresolved when they were younger. It spills over to a lot of different things.
That's exactly
And when we're thinking
right.
about the common conflicts that exist around the home, right? I made a list here of a few of them that kind of jump in my mind, whether that, I'm not saying that we've maybe done all of these, but we probably have. Yeah. So one source of conflict that tends to come up is money or how money is spent. Right. One individual is upset that the budget got off, or that one person maybe bought something that wasn't necessary. Right. I'm guilty of always wanting the latest and greatest in technology. Mike, I think in our short time of knowing each other the last few years, you probably picked up on that about me, that Kurt usually has that newest iPhone, or he has that newest this or that, and that is something. And
your Apple Watch looks really nice too.
I do like it. I do. And but this is only my second one. Anyway, okay. Yeah. Anyway. So money and spending is a source of conflict.
Absolutely.
Another one is time and how time is spent. I tend to hear this source of conflict coming up between maybe a mom who is at home with kids, maybe in the summertime right now, like we're finding, and dad's been at work, and then dad is going somewhere else and not coming home and spending the time maybe the wife or the mom thinks needs to be spent there. Sure. Maybe time with each other or quality time together. Yeah. Right. It's one thing to be in each other's presence, another to spend quality time. Another conflict that we hear a lot, or the chores or responsibilities that come up. Right. You've been asked to do something and you don't do it.
Well. And these are presuppositions that are formed by our viewing of other marriages, right? And so, as far as like chores and responsibilities, those are unique to each couple. Yeah. But when you first get married, especially me, I saw the way that my mom did things. I saw the way that my dad did things. And so I had this presupposition built in, these expectations built in. And Katie didn't even know those expectations. My wife, Katie, she didn't know those expectations. And so then you kind of find yourself frustrated, like, well, why are you not getting up and making the kids breakfast every morning, or doing this task or this or whatever? And it's all because of a misunderstanding of expectations to a degree in that. But, but that's chores and responsibilities, right? But I say you wrote this down on the last one. That's kind of a common one. That's communication. I am a terrible communicator. I don't know why.
You talk every Sunday. I feel like
communication is more than talking. It's knowing when to say the right things at the right time. Okay, that's the art of communication, right? Not just being able to speak, but knowing when to speak, when not to speak, and just knowing that right time. But communication is about helping each other be on the same page.
Yeah.
I would say that for the most part, that with all of these other things, I think communication is a root issue to a degree. Now, sin is ultimately the root issue, right? But as far as communication, just being open with one another, like that would help. If I would have just talked to Katie about some of the things that I saw my mom doing, like some expectations, it could have saved a lot of time and energy. If you talk about chores, responsibilities, if you talk about expectations of how time will be spent this weekend or tonight or whatever, or talk about money and spending issues or whatever. Because I think in a lot of these times that there's this assumption of motive.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that is a cause of conflict, is when I assume what your motive is in your action. And that is really what causes that rub, right? Is when you have a misunderstanding of motive, that this is intentionally against me, that what you are doing is intentionally against me. It's against the grain of what I am trying to accomplish. And this is the only result in that could be conflict.
Well, and you brought something to our staff a couple of years ago when you joined us here at Green Acres. You brought this kind of culture shift of saying, hey, we're going to assume the best in each other, right? And you've said that to us multiple times.
Yeah.
And I really feel like that is indwelled amongst our staff, that we're not going to jump to a conclusion because of bad communication or this. We're going to assume that this employee, this coworker, is doing what they're supposed to do and is doing it with excellence. And we're going to always assume that first. And that's the workplace context here at Green Acres. But what you're saying, that also applies with our spouses, with our family members, with our friends, and in our homes, is that we assume first the best of someone, not the worst.
And that's hard.
It is hard.
That's difficult. But if you think, okay, well, maybe you're in the middle of a conflict right now. Maybe you're about to enter into one, or you just got out of one. There are no other options, okay? Because that's just the reality of sinful people being with other sinful people.
Yeah.
But when you try to think through, okay, well, where do I even try to start to come to a resolve?
Yeah.
I think that my wife does a really good job of pressing pause. Now we all have the urge to just jump into a conflict without thinking through or whatever. But if we think, okay, you recognize you're in a conflict. Okay, what is step one? Yeah. I have couples who ask me that a lot. What is step one? I always tell them this: pause. But no matter what's going on, no matter how urgent it seems, press pause. Because I love what Jesus says in response to talking about judging others and things like that. But I think it really is helpful to conflict resolution. Is in Matthew chapter 7, verse 5, he talks about getting the log out of your own eye. Yeah. Okay, so before you can talk about a splinter in someone else's eye, get the log out of your own eye first. And you can only do that if you pause first. Yeah. All right. Now, Kurt, I think that we need to have a disclaimer here.
Okay.
We've been talking about marriage. We've been talking about gender roles. Now we're talking about conflict resolution. I would like to just go on the record to say, you and I are not the experts.
No, we are not.
Okay. Like, if you were to ask my wife, hey, what do you think about Michael teaching a marriage series? She would probably giggle and be like, okay, we can tell you what not to do. Okay. No, but in all reality, let's just admit that whether you have been married for 50 years, 15 years, 5 years, you've only been married 5 years, right? And let's just admit for all of us, there are areas of growth in our life that are desperately needed.
Sure.
And so, we don't want to come across as, oh man, these guys are experts and they must never struggle at home. Listen, we all struggle together. All right. And so this is just the design of the church and community. We spur each other on toward Christ likeness. But we can always go to Scripture as our authority.
Yes.
And so I'm not the authority. Chip, you're not the authority. God's word is the authority. And I love that's what he says, that Jesus says in Matthew 7:5. Get the log out of your own eye.
Yeah.
So pause. Get the log out of your own eye. Meaning that you need to do exactly what James chapter 4 says, is that you need to really search within yourself for any unchecked desires that could be within us that would cause a quarrel or disagreement or argument, that you need to pause and check your own heart first.
Yeah. Well, and you get yourself right before addressing the issue towards someone else.
That's right.
Right? Like the conflicts, we said a few minutes ago, that they can spin out of control. Oftentimes when that's the case, it's because we've been so consumed with our own wants, desires, ignoring our own faults in the situations, that we just shoot off the rails and we say something.
That's right.
And or we do something that we shouldn't do, and then we just make the problem worse. We make the conflict worse. And so, slowing down, hitting pause, examining our own hearts, examining our own motives, where we maybe found fault in ourselves and need to seek restitution with that other person.
That's right.
And so then you go and say, hey, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like those are maybe the two hardest words to say to someone that you love deeply, is to admit in a conflict where maybe both sides have done something, but to be the first person to say, hey, I'm sorry.
Somebody told me a long time ago, I can't even remember who said it, but they said you can tell the growth in your relationship with Jesus, not your spouse, but you can tell the growth in your relationship with Jesus in the length of time it takes you to say you're sorry to others. And I think that that's a good rule for the way we interact with others in general, but also especially with your spouse, with your kids, the willingness to quickly admit fault. So now I will tell you, I have a tendency to say I'm sorry too soon. And this is what I mean by it. My sorry is more of an attempt to dismiss than to reconcile. And that's just within my own heart, that if I can muster up the courage to say I'm sorry, then it should be over and I can go back to whatever I was doing. Right. Well, that's not the way that Jesus treats us. That's not the design of the relationship, and that's not the design of being sorrowful or telling your wife or your husband, I'm sorry. It's when your heart comes to the conclusion of understanding, I'm in the wrong. This is where I'm in the wrong. Now, even if your spouse is in the wrong, you still get the log out of your own eye.
Sure.
You still pause and see, okay, God, where am I missing you in this? Not where am I failing my wife, but God, where am I missing you? Where am I failing you in this? And when that's how you get the log out of your eye, is that you take this. Remember that the war is not against your wife or your husband or your kids or your coworker. That's not the war. What does Paul tell us? That the war is not, the battle is not against flesh and blood. It's against the authorities, the principalities of the greater realm, the spiritual realm around us. And so when you come to that understanding, your sin is not just against your wife. Your sin is not just against your husband. Your sin is against the Lord. So you have to vertically redirect your sorrowfulness into a style of repentance, and then you can horizontally work things out.
Well, and a gospel-centered home, a Great Commissioned focused marriage, that whole idea we talked about a few weeks ago in this first episode was that Jesus is at the center of everything, center of your heart, center of your relationship. And if he's not at the center of the conflict resolution, there's something wrong. Like our eyes and our hearts have to be, hey, I got to get past being mad at this person. I've got to keep in perspective the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, that love and grace and forgiveness that was extended to me. And then I've been commanded, as I'm an imitator of Jesus, to extend grace and forgiveness to others.
So let's pause right there and think through that, because I think you bring up an incredible point for us to be reminded of, that remember the point, the purpose of marriage, illustration, procreation, and sanctification.
Yep.
All right, so if we are to illustrate the gospel in our marriage, in conflict, we are called to illustrate the gospel. It's not that conflict is sinful, disagreement is sinful. It's how we handle it that can become sinful.
Yeah.
So if we are to illustrate the gospel, think about the act of forgiveness, because so many times we think of a resolution that is almost reciprocal. So, okay, if you can get to this point, then we can come to a resolution.
Yeah.
If you can get to this point, then I can forgive you. But I love the way that Jesus illustrates forgiveness. The Bible tells us that in the midst of our sin, in the midst of our brokenness, in the midst of our rebellion, that is when Jesus died for us.
Yeah.
That is when he extends grace. That is when he extends forgiveness. And so if you are trying to come up with a resolution in the midst of your conflict based on any concept of reciprocity, we have missed the point of the gospel completely in our marriage. You see, the idea of forgiveness is that it's this transaction-based understanding, right? That you do this and I will do this. Okay, that's transaction-based. That's reciprocity-based. But with Jesus, it is free completely.
Yeah.
It is forgiveness freely given. It is grace freely given. That if we want to interact with our spouse, if we want to interact with others as Christ has called us to do, there are no strings attached to our forgiveness. There are no strings attached to our grace that we are extending to one another. That when we are saying, I'm sorry, when we're coming to the resolution, it's not based on what any one of us can bring to the table as far as your spouse. It is based on Jesus forgave me in the midst of my rebellion. Therefore, I am extending grace and forgiveness to you because this is what Jesus modeled for me.
Yeah. Well, and, remember the discussion with the disciples? They asked, hey, how many times do I need to forgive?
Yeah.
And Jesus said, well, 70 times 7, right? Like it says, hey.
Do you know what 70 times 7 is?
490.
Wow, dude, you came up that fast.
I like math. But
Wow. I'm terrible at math.
I didn't do a lot of it in school. But
We digress.
we're playing card games or dice, anyway. Yahtzee.
We don't play dice.
We play Yahtzee.
Okay.
I love it. But what that whole, do we actually keep a tab and say, hey, once I've forgiven you 490 times, I'm done?
Right.
No, the meaning there is that you keep doing it.
Yeah.
And we can't get to a point of forgiving our spouses, our children, our coworkers. We don't get to that point if our conflict isn't actually resolved, right? Like if the point is to end the conflict and not resolve the conflict, then it's just going to keep stirring up. Like, hey, if we're done fighting, that doesn't mean the conflict's over. There has to be an actual restitution that happens where healing occurs, forgiveness abounds, and grace grows. And so I love it. I love that.
Let me read 1 Corinthians 13. I love this. This is often read at weddings.
Yeah.
But we kind of overlook some of these things because we all know that love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, is not boastful, is not arrogant, is not rude, is not self-seeking, is not irritable. I got to work on that. I get irritable at times. And does not keep a record of wrongs. Yeah. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Paul is saying, is that the act of forgiveness is that you are keeping no record of your wrongdoings. A lot of times when I'm counseling couples, this will come up. And I'm also guilty of this. And I know if my wife were sitting here with us, she'd say she's guilty of this. I'm sure you would say the same. Lauren would say the same. Listeners, you would say the same. But we often, when we are arguing, we bring up some things from the past that, well, you've done this or you've done this, and so you begin to stack this record of wrongdoings, and you never really get to the bottom because you never really get to the point of forgiveness where that transaction is ended. Like, you owe me nothing else for this type of situation. But then it says this in verse 6: love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth.
Yeah.
No matter what in conflict resolution, we need to find the point of unrighteousness. Where is that? So in the fire service, we always learned that when you go into a fire, it could be extended to other places and you have to fight that back a little bit. So when you walk into a room that's on fire, and it's crawling over the ceiling above you, I mean, it's so exciting. Okay. I mean, it's an adrenaline rush. You bust open a door and it flames start rolling out in front of you. It's unbelievable. And so you start hitting it back and you're pushing it back. But if you don't push it back all the way down to the point of origin, the flames keep coming. Like they'll work its way back. So you can work your way up and down the ceiling and push it back to the wall. But if you don't work it all the way down to the point of origin, then that flame keeps coming back. It keeps growing. Yeah. It's the same thing in conflicts. You have to get to the point of origin, meaning of what Paul tells us, you have to find the true point of unrighteousness. Because when you get rid of the unrighteousness, this is why Jesus says, get the log out of your eye. Yeah. Because what he's saying, he said, root the evil, root the sin, root the log out of your own heart first, and then come to that point of origin where you're having this disagreement. But when you root out unrighteousness in your own self, and then with your spouse or with others that you are dealing with, that is when you can get to the point of truth. And that is where joy takes place. But listen to what it says in verse 7. It says, it bears all things, talking about love. Yeah. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Yeah. So I love this about God, that he is, that he forbears our transgressions. That even in the midst of wrong, that he continues to love us. Yeah. Even in the midst of our rebellion, he continues to love us. And this is what it means to be submitting to the Lord in your marriage, is that even in the midst of wrongdoings toward you, because God deals with all of our wrongdoings toward him. All of our sin is an attack against God himself. And he takes that and he bears it, and then he extends grace. Yeah. If we get to that point in our conflicts, that where we come to an understanding that I'm going to bear your transgression, that even in the midst of your wrong, I know you're wrong. Yeah. But the purpose of resolution is not so that you know that I'm right. It's so that you can magnify the name of the Lord, that you can magnify the character of Christ in the midst of it. And when we do that, we're illustrating the gospel. We are sanctifying one another in the gospel. Now, what about procreation in the midst of conflict? Procreation is giving life. Yeah. Right? Yeah. That's what the idea behind it. Even with our discipleship process of in Matthew chapter 28, that when you are making disciples, you are extending the life of Jesus. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So when we extend grace, you are extending life. This is illustrating procreation. This is modeling procreation, even in the midst of conflict, that I want to extend life to you through my words and through my actions. I want to extend life even in the midst of this conflict.
Wow. That's good. That's good. Well, and gospel-centered, it means that the gospel is a part of everything. That's right. If we have the mindset when we're in conflict with people and we perceive, hey, I was once in conflict with God because of my sin, because of what Christ did on the cross, that is no longer a conflict through his redemptive blood. So because of that, if I have that perspective, so when I have conflict with someone I care about, coworker, friend, spouse, family member, and my perspective is I will bear their burdens, what you're talking about. Yeah. And I will extend an unlimited amount of forgiveness, just like God has extended to me. Amen. That radically changes everything. And that will change and mold your home to be a full representation of the love of Jesus and not of anything else. Right. Okay, so as we come here around a wrapping point, like you said, we're not experts. We're not specialists. And
Yeah.
sometimes conflict, sometimes disagreements do need extended help.
Yeah.
And so one thing I do want to plug and mention, if you're here in East Texas, a member of our church, we have a great resource called GraceWorks Counseling.
Right.
And if you're dealing in strife, whether that is between a man and woman, if it's a family member, if it's maybe just a personal conflict that you need extra talking to.
I'm giggling right now because I'm thinking through, Ken Brumley is over our GraceWorks Counseling, and he is literally not only one of the funniest guys that I know, but I've listened to his talks on conflict resolution and just does an incredible job. But he would be a great resource to anybody who is around our area, as well as our other staff members at GraceWorks, with Lipo, with Miss Jane, Miss Jamie. We have great counselors who would love, but here's a new addition. They actually do Zoom meetings now.
Oh, yeah.
That's
one of the benefits of the COVID lockdown, right? We've had to be trained to do things differently, and they've added that resource.
So I just want to say, if you're listening outside of East Texas, this can still be a resource to you. And we have things on our website that will help you in our resources as well. And we would love to help you and to pray with you any way that we can, even if that's just simply, hey, I just need you to pray for my marriage. I need you to pray for this relationship. We consider it an honor to be able to pray with you and for you on behalf of your relationships.
That's good. One other thing I'll mention, if it is a marital situation, I would encourage you, if you're not involved, you're at our church, if you're not involved in one of our connect groups with other couples, there's such a benefit to be doing biblical community with other people, specifically if you're in a marriage context with other married couples. Right. You spur each other on, you encourage one another. But even within that, you might find someone who could be a mentoring couple to you. And I think everybody in their life need mentors, whether that's a personal, a one-on-one relationship, or as a couple, you have another husband and wife who's gone before you, and you get to ask questions, you get to have conversations, they help keep you accountable. And these kind of things, if you're finding yourself in isolation, don't. Get yourself involved, plugged in, because that's going to be a huge aid when conflict arrives or as you're kind of healing and restoring post-conflict.
And let me end by saying this, just as an encouragement for everyone. No matter how far down the road of destruction you are one step away from restoration.
That's good.
Jesus is always one step away. And he is in the restoration business.
Absolutely.
We have seen it over and over and over again. There is no amount of conflict that God cannot resolve himself. And so do not lose heart, but have hope in the fact that Jesus can restore all things. And I promise you, according to his word, he can restore your marriage and your relationships that you think are just broken.
That's so great. Hey, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you aren't subscribed, please click the button, subscribe to the podcast, hit the bell, get those notifications, download us, Apple, Spotify, all those. But I've loved our conversation today.
Yeah.
Mike, I hope our viewers have and listeners as well. And we can't wait to do it again next time.
See you soon.
Hey, thanks for listening to today's episode and joining in on our conversation. If you liked what you heard or you want to know more about Green Acres, go check out our website at gabc.org or follow us on Instagram at gabc_Tyler. Have a great day.